Greetings, scholars. In this lesson, we will look at saying at decimals and shading in decimals on grids. So let's get started. You guys are used to the ones, tens, hundreds place, okay? But we're going to be going to the right of the decimal. What? There's a right of the decimal? Yes, and that's the tenths and hundredths place. So think of the ones place as $1, okay? And then you keep going $10, $100, $1,000. Now we're going this way to the right of the decimal. You're cutting that $1 into 10 parts. You're cutting that whole into 10 parts. So that is called the tenths place. Then you're cutting that same whole to the hundredths place into 100 parts. So those numbers are getting smaller as you're going to the right. So feel free to rewind this back, pause it, anything like that. So we're looking at the tenths place. Again, it's cut into 10 sections, and that is 10 columns. So think of that as dimes. And then you've got the hundredths place. That whole is cut into 100 small squares. So now, let's say we're tasked with the responsibility of shading in 3 tenths, 0.3. You're saying, what's 0.3? Well, let's move it over here to what is called the mini version of our hundredths chart, right? Of our place value chart. We've got the ones place, tenths, hundredths. So you put this here, you're going to see it's 3 tenths. That 3 is sitting in the tenths place. So how would we shade in 3 tenths? Well, we would take this 1/10, shade that in, go down 1. Thanks for straightening that out, computer. 2 and 3. Now, you can also shade it in on the hundredths grid, same exact way, because this is 10 going down, so that's 10. 10 going down, that's 20. 10 going down, that is 30. It's 30 hundredths, excuse me, but it's 1/10, 2 tenths, 3 tenths. So this is how you can shade in 3 tenths on the tenths grid and then on the hundredths grid. So shading in 3 columns will give you 3 tenths. Now, how would you say that? You would say 3 tenths. So save this number and then whatever place it's sitting in, 3 tenths is how you would say that. Let's go to our next slide. Let's say we're tasked to shade in 3.03. You say, well, what's 0.03? Well, put it into our place value chart. Decimal, 0 tenths, there's no tenths, and 3 hundredths. Remember, those hundredths are those small squares. So we're going to shade in 1 hundredths, 2 hundredths, 3 hundredths. So that's how you would shade in 0.03. A lot of students get confused with this. Let me see if I can put this on dual display. They think that 0.3 and 0.03 are the same. But look, this is a 3 in the tenths place. This is a 0 in the tenths place and a 3 in the hundredths place. So here's 3 tenths. Here's 3 hundredths. So just be alert when you're doing that skill. Okay, let's take this off dual display and we'll go to the next one. So I want you to start pausing these and talk out how you would solve this or how you would shade it in and see if you get it right. So, pause once I get to the next one, but how would you shade in 0.08? And how would you say it? So we know that there's a 0 in the tenths place, an 8 in the hundredths place, so we would say 8. And then the place it ends up in, hundredths. So this is 8 hundredths. And how would you shade that in? Well, each small square is a hundredth, so you're going to need a total of 8 of them. Okay? So we've got our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So hopefully you said, I would shade in 8 small squares. This is my student voice. Now, let's say it says shade in 0.13. Well, think about the place values. The 1 is in the tenths place. The 3 is in the hundredths place. So you would say 13 hundredths, because that 3 ends up in the hundredths place. Make sure you get that TH. So 13 hundredths. How would we shade that in? Well, we would shade in 1/10, which is an entire column. And we still need to get those 3 hundredths, and those hundredths are those small squares. So this is like about 13 cents. This is 13 cents in your pocket there. Okay, see if you can say this and shade it in. So this is 6/10. We would shade in 6 columns because a tenth is a column. I hope you didn't say 6 small squares. That would be 0.06. So this is 0.6, so that's 6/10, 6 dimes, 60 cents. So I always like to check here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. I've got my 6/10 because look, 6/10 columns. 6/10. Okay, how would you say this? How would you shade it in? 45 hundredths. Then we shade in 4 columns because that 4 is in the tenths place. And then how many small squares would we shade in? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's my 4/10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 small squares there. 45 hundredths. Now let's go to the next one. Oh, this was a change up. Shade in 1 and 5 hundredths because 1 in the ones place. And then when you say the decimal, you say it as and. 1 and 5 hundredths because that 5 is in the hundredths place and there's no tenths. So how are we going to shade that in? Well, if it says 1, that's 1 whole. So we've got to shade in this whole thing. Okay, we've got to shade in this whole thing here. So I'm going to shade in this whole thing. And then it says 5 hundredths. So I got to shade in just 5 small squares. Because again, those hundredths are the individual squares. 100ths, 200ths, 300ths, 400ths, 500ths. Shade that in there. So we've got 1 and 5 hundredths. Now, let's shade in 1.3. How would you say that? 1 and for that decimal. Remember the decimal is and. 1 and 3/10, because look, that 3 is in the tenths place. So we shade in this whole thing because you got to get that whole shaded in. And then we're going to shade in 3/10. So remember, don't get it confused with 0.03, which would be 3 small squares, which would be 300. We need 3/10. Tenths are the column. So here's 1/10, 2/10, 3/10. Okay, let's go to the next one. So we've got 1 whole and 3/10, 1 and 3/10, which is $1.30. 3 dimes is 30 cents. Let's now shade in 1.58. So how would we say that? 1 and 58 hundredths. So we'll shade in this whole thing. Hopefully you're thinking, okay, you can pause it here if you want to and say what you would do to shade in the rest. Shade in this whole thing because that's one. This is 1 whole, and then we still need to shade in 5/10 because that 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 8 hundredths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we got our 1 hundredths, 2 hundredths, 3 hundredths, 4 hundredths, 5 hundredths, 6 hundredths, 7 hundredths, 8 hundredths. So that's 1 and 58 hundredths. All right, in this lesson, we looked at saying and drawing decimals on the grid. Keep practicing until you get it. You can do it.